Don't ask him anything." My daughter-in-law said it to the nurse without looking up from my paperwork. "He signs whatever we give him." I was awake. My eyes were open. The monitor above my head was drawing my heartbeat across a screen where anybody in the room could read it, and Charlene, my son's wife, was filling out my admission forms with a pen she had taken out of her own purse. The nurse looked at me. That was the worst part. She looked at me the way you look at a chair somebody is standing in front of. Wendell laughed. My oldest boy, 46 years old, laughed the way men laugh when they want the room to know a thing is settled. Then he said, "She's not wrong, Dad." He pulled a chair around and sat on it backward, arms across the top, and he told me 3 things the way a man delivers good news. He told me they had talked to the bank about putting the operating line in his name because, he said, "You shouldn't be signing for that kind of money at your age." He told me they had driven over to the place in town on Sunday, the one with the brick front, and there was a room on the south side that gets sun all afternoon, and they had already walked it. And then he told me the 3rd thing. He said they'd had a man out with a transit and stakes on the Northwest 3 because the drainage district wanted the corner and, he said, Mom's not using it. 48 years I have been on that ground. My wife Doreen planted the windbreak on the West Line in 1983, 46 rows of cedar, and she is buried in the Northwest 3, under a stone with her name on one half and mine on the other, because you buy them in pairs and you get a discount, and she thought that was funny. Mom's not using it. I did not raise my voice. I have never once in my life gotten anything back by raising my voice. I asked the nurse if she would hand me my coat off the hook, and she did. And I took out of the inside pocket a notebook with a cracked cover and a rubber band around it, and I opened it to the last written line, and I wrote the date, July 29th, 2026. Then, because there was an IV taped into the back of my right hand, I put a dash where the number goes, and I initialed it left-handed. A dash means I was there, and I took no reading. In 52 years I have written 11 dashes. My left hand shook one time, at the start of the C, and then it quit shaking and finished the letter. Charlene watched me do it. She turned to the nurse and she said, "See?" Then I asked the nurse if I could use a telephone. She brought me the cordless from the station and set it on the tray table and went out and pulled the curtain part of the way, which was a kindness, and I made one call. It took under 4 minutes. Wendell was in the hallway by then, and Charlene had gone down for coffee, and neither of them thought to ask me who I was calling, because a man who signs whatever you give him is not a man who calls anybody. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people get wrong about old men. I did not decide anything in that bed out of anger. Anger is weather. It comes through and it goes. What I decided was something I had been putting off for 1.5 years, and the only thing that room did was take away my last reason to keep putting it off. They thought the next paper I had to sign was my will. There was one more piece of paper before that, and it had a deadline printed on it, and the deadline was the 1st of September. They discharged me Friday. Saturday was the 1st of August. Sunday morning, I came out on the porch with my coffee, and my phone had 31 missed calls on it, and there was a car in my driveway I did not know, and a woman standing beside it that I had met twice in my life, both times at a wedding, holding a leather-bound book against her chest with both arms the way you hold a thing you have carried a long way. My name is Calvin Anderson. I am 71 years old, and I have written down the weather every single day since 1974. If you have ever sat in a room while your own family talked about you in the third person, stay with me. And if you want more stories like this one, take a second and subscribe, because I am going to tell you exactly what one telephone call from a hospital bed can do to a family that has stopped asking. Her name was Laura Lee Prentice. She is Charlene's mother. She is 68, and she has been a notary public in Black Hawk County for 22 years. Before I could get down the steps, she said, "Mr. Anderson, I need to ask you something, and I'd rather do it standing up." Behind her, my phone started going again. I looked at the screen. Charlene. I let it ring out, and it started again, and I answered it that time. And I want you to understand what she asked me, because I have thought about it every day since. She did not ask about the money. She did not ask if I was all right, or when I'd been released, or whether I'd eaten. She said, "Who called my mother?" Nobody called her mother. I want to say that plainly, right at the front, because it took me 2 weeks to work out, and it is the truest thing in this entire story. Nobody called Laura Lee Prentice. On Saturday, the 1st of August, $1,900 did not arrive in a checking account where $1,900 had arrived on the 1st of the month for 88 months in a row, it being a standing transfer inside one bank in Grundy Center that posts on the 1st, whatever day of the week the 1st happens to be. And by Sunday morning, my daughter-in-law was scared enough to call her own mother and ask to borrow it. And in that phone call, she said one sentence too many. On Wednesday morning, from that bed in Waterloo, I called the bank in Grundy Center and told a woman named Deb Sorensen to stop the transfer that goes out on the 1st. That was the call. It took under 4 minutes, and I did not raise my voice for any of it. That is the whole machine. I did not build it. I only stopped feeding it. Let me back up, because you need to know what the ground under all this is. In 1974, I was 19 years old. The bank and my uncle sold the home place out from under my father while he was standing on it. He was a proud man, and he was not a smart one about paper, and the two of those together will finish anybody. He lived 14 more months in a rented house in Grundy Center, with a window that looked at the back of a hardware store. And the last thing he ever said to me, in a voice you had to lean in for, was, "Nobody asked me. I bought the first 80 in 1978, at a kitchen table with a Formica top that is still in my kitchen. I bought the rest over the next 20 years, a piece at a time, the way you eat an elephant. 240 acres now, corn and beans, hill ground on the north end that you have to farm sideways. And in 1974, the same year they sold my father out, I started a notebook. Date, rainfall, wind, initials, every day. Doreen used to say, "You're writing down the sky, Cal. The sky can't read." She thought it was a foolish habit right up until the year we had the hail claim, and my book was the only thing in the county that could tell the adjuster what fell and when. Doreen died in March of 2021. Before she went, she made me promise 2 things. The first was that I'd keep the boys on the land. The second was that nobody would ever move her off the Northwest 3. I have 3 children. Wendell is the oldest. Verity is 40. She drives a school bus and works afternoons at a veterinary clinic in Rhinebeck. And her brothers have called her the one who married, down since before her husband's boots were dry. Brody is 34, and he has lived in the tenant house on my place for 8 years and has never paid me $1 for it. And I never asked him for one, which I now understand was not generosity. It was avoidance wearing generosity's coat. Since April of 2019, I had been sending Wendell $1,900 on the 1st of every month. 88 months. $167,200. It was for the kids' school and insurance, he said. And I did not audit my own son. And since 2016, he had been renting my 240 acres from me for $110 an acre in a county where the average cash rent this year is $285. That is $175 an acre I was handing him every year without either of us ever saying the word. $42,000 a year, 11 years running. I am not telling you those numbers to make you angry at him. I am telling you so you understand what I was actually holding, which is the thing nobody in that hospital room understood. I was not a man they had to manage. I was the man the whole arrangement was standing on. You want to know why I sat there and let my son tell me about a room with afternoon sun? 2 reasons. If I pulled the operating line in the middle of July, 240 acres of corn would have died standing up, and 3 of my grandchildren would have lost the only house they know, because the house Wendell put up in 2014 sits on the same note as the crop, and my name is underneath both of them. And Doreen made me promise to keep the boys on the land. But there is a third thing, and it is the one that mattered. In Iowa, if you want to end a farm lease, you have to give written notice by the 1st of September, and the lease still runs until the 1st of March after that. That is the law. That is not a thing you can do angry on a Tuesday. That is a thing with a date on it. So I had until the 1st of September, and I had 5 weeks, and the only thing I had to do in those 5 weeks was not say a word. Lauralee sat at my kitchen table with the book in front of her, and her hands flat on either side of it, like it might go somewhere. "I've been a notary since 2004, she said. "I've never had a complaint. I keep a journal because I was taught to keep a journal, and half of them don't anymore." She turned it around to face me and opened it to a page and put her finger on a line. "July the 15th, 2024, she said. "You see what I was doing." She was in Cedar Falls that afternoon at a closing, from 1 until nearly 4. There were 3 entries, all in her hand, all with signatures beside them. "My daughter borrowed my seal that month," she said. "She said it was for a change of beneficiary on her own policy and she'd bring it back Monday." And she did bring it back Monday. And I never thought about it again until yesterday, when she called me at 7 this morning and asked me for $1,900 and told me not to mention it to Wendell. And then she said something about your money not moving and about a room in town you were not going to like. She closed the book. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "I don't know what my daughter put my stamp on, but I know I wasn't there for it, and I know she said your name." I got up and poured her a cup of coffee she did not ask for, because there is nothing else you can do with your hands at a moment like that. Here is what I did not do. I did not tell her what I had already done on Wednesday from a hospital bed. I did not tell her about the 1st of September. She was 68 years old, and she had just found out something about her own child, and there was not one thing in the world I needed from her that day, except for her to keep that book somewhere safe. That is all I asked her. Keep the book. Don't put it in the mail. Don't tell anyone you were here. She looked at me a long moment, and then she said the thing that told me she already understood more than she was saying. "You didn't seem surprised." I said I had been farming for 52 years, and I had not been surprised by weather since 1993. She drove out of my yard at 9:40 on Sunday morning, and my phone rang 11 more times before noon, and I did not answer any of them. And I want you to know that I was not being cruel. I was doing arithmetic, because there was one question I could not answer yet, and it was this. If my daughter-in-law had put her mother's seal on a document with my name on it in July of 2024, what document was worth that? Monday they came out to the house together. Wendell walked in first and went to the refrigerator like he always has, and stood there with the door open looking at nothing. And that small ordinary thing nearly took my legs out from under me, because he has done it since he was 6. Charlene did not sit down. She stood at the end of the table, and she had a folder. Charlene has sold insurance in this county for 9 years, and she is very good at it. She knows which paper goes in front of which person, and what minute of the day to set it down. She put a single sheet in front of me, and it was a letter on the stationery of Dr. Emery Vandekamp, who has been my family doctor for 35 years, and who delivered Brody in a snowstorm. The letter said that in his professional opinion, I would benefit from assistance in the management of my financial affairs. He wrote that after we talked to him, Charlene said. We told him about the notebook. We told him about the fence gate and the propane. The fence gate was in June. I left a gate open, and 11 head of a neighbor's cattle got into my beans. That happened. I paid for the beans. The propane was February, and it was not my error at all. It was a delivery they missed. But I understood in that moment that it did not matter what had happened. What mattered was that a list existed, and it had my name at the top of it. Then Wendell shut the refrigerator and turned around and said, "Dad, nobody's taking anything. We're just making it so you don't have to carry it." That is the sentence. If you remember nothing else out of this whole story, remember that one. Because every single thing they did for the next 3 weeks came out of it like water out of one spring. We're making it so you don't have to carry it. Not, we want it. Not, we've decided. We're doing this for you. Charlene slid a second paper across. The January renewal on the operating line, with a place for my signature as guarantor, dated forward. "Might as well get it out of the way while we're all sitting here," she said. I picked it up. I read the whole thing all the way down, and it took me a while, and nobody in that kitchen said a word for 4 minutes, and I have never in my life enjoyed 4 minutes more. Then I folded it in half and I put it in the inside pocket of my coat, next to the notebook, and I said, "Let me look at it." Wendell said, "You just looked at it." I said, "Then let me look at it again." Verity came by that evening with a casserole she'd made and a bag of feed for my dog, and I did not tell her either. She sat on the porch step below me the way she has since she was 9, and she said, "They came out today, didn't they?" I said they had. She said, "Dad, do you want me to say something to him?" And I said no. I said, "I want you to drive me to Cedar Falls on the 10th. My heart." She said, "Okay, Dad." She did not ask me one question about it. 40 years old, and she has never once asked me for a reason. That is a thing I did not think about carefully enough at the time, and it cost me something later, and I will get to it. On Wednesday the 5th of August they filed. I got the warning the way you get it about Hale, which is that somebody else calls you first. Delbert Fry, who has fixed my machinery since 1988 and who has no reason on this earth to lie to me, called at 7 in the morning and said, "Cal, Wendell's asking around about who'd sign a statement that you've slipped." They filed a petition in the district court in Grundy County asking to have a conservator appointed over me, and along with it an application for a temporary conservator, which is the fast one, the one that lets somebody sign in your place before anybody has to prove anything. Dr. Vandekamp's letter was attached. Brody's statement was attached. The next afternoon, a young man in a county car came up my gravel with a folder, and he would not hand it to me until I said my name out loud, first and last. That is how a man actually finds out. They are required to put it in your hand. Brody, 34 years old, lives in my tenant house, and he signed a sworn statement about my mind. I got a copy later, and I read it twice. 3 pages. He got to the end of the second one and signed. I know he did not read past it, because the 3rd page has my mother's maiden name in it spelled wrong, and Brody would have caught that, because it was his middle name too. That is my son. He did not do it out of hate. He did it because Wendell put a pen in his hand at the kitchen table, and Brody has never in his life been handed a pen and told no. The mail that same afternoon had a letter in it from a life insurance company in Des Moines that I have never done business with. It was addressed to me, and it was not a bill. It said that as the insured person on a policy coming up on its 2nd anniversary, I was being sent confirmation of the coverage on my life, and it gave a number, and it gave a toll-free line. I looked at it for a while. Then I put it in the drawer with the twine and the fuses, and I went out and checked the beans because there was nothing I could do with it yet. And a man who does things before he can do them is a man who does them wrong. Here is what those 11 days were actually like, and I am going to tell you the small part, not the loud part. The phone rang. It rang more that August than it had in the 5 years since Doreen died, and every single time it rang, it was because somebody needed a signature or a number or a date. Not once in 11 days did anybody ask me how I was sleeping. And I want to be honest about the other thing. For 5 years, I had been setting 2 plates. Not on purpose. You come in from the field at 7:30, and your hands do what they have done 9,000 times. And one night, you are standing at the counter looking at 2 plates, and there is nobody to be embarrassed in front of. I stopped doing that in August. Not because I healed, because I got busy. On the 8th, I walked the Northwest 3. I had not been up there since the middle of July, which is a long time for me. It is 3 acres in the corner where the ground breaks toward the creek, and it has never been farmed because you cannot get a header in there without leaving half of it. My grandfather is up there. My grandmother. A boy of theirs who did not live a week and has a stone the size of a bread loaf. And Doreen, since March of 2021, under a gray stone with a cedar cut into the top of it because that is what she asked for. There were stakes in the ground, orange flags on wire, the kind that whip in any wind at all, and they had run a line right through the middle of it, and one of them was driven in about 4 feet off the corner of my wife's stone. I stood there for a long time. I am not going to pretend I did anything but stand there. Then I walked the line and pulled every flag, and I stacked them by the gate, because I have never in my life left trash in a field, and I drove back to the house and I called the county. The clerk was very helpful. She said yes, there was an application on file. Application for authorization to disinter and relocate human remains, filed the 21st of April, 2026. Requested by the Drainage District, consent of next of kin attached. I asked her whose signature was on the consent. She said, Wendell Anderson, it says he's the son. Doreen has a husband. Her husband was alive on the 21st of April and was in fact in a doctor's office in Waterloo that morning, and nobody in the state of Iowa asked her husband anything. I want to tell you what happened in my chest at that moment, and I do not have the words, so I will tell you what I did instead. I said thank you to the clerk. I hung up the telephone. I went to the kitchen sink and washed my hands, which were not dirty. Then I picked up the phone again and called a lawyer in Cedar Falls named Ambrose Teal, who is not my family's lawyer and has never met one of my children. And I said I would like an hour of your time on Tuesday, and I would like you to clear your afternoon. He asked what it was regarding. I said paper. That night I wrote in the book, August 8th. Nothing fell. Wind out of the southeast, 8. I initialed it. Then I sat there with the pen still in my hand for a while, and I thought about my father in that rented house looking at the back of a hardware store, saying nobody asked me. They had until the 1st of September and they did not know it. On Monday the 10th, Verity drove me to Cedar Falls. She thought she was taking me to a cardiologist. What I actually did was sit for 4 hours with a neuropsychologist named Prue Halstead, who gave me tests that would make a college boy sweat. Clock drawing. Word lists an hour apart. A thing where you connect numbers and letters against a stopwatch. Names of the last 5 presidents. Serial 7s down from 100, which I want to say I did faster than she expected, because I have been doing bushels times price in my head at a truck scale since 1978. At the end, she said, Mr. Anderson, I'm going to say this the way I'd want it said. There is nothing wrong with you. I asked her to put that in writing, with the raw scores, with the date, and to note in it that no family member had been present at any point. She looked at me for a second, and then she said, How long has this been going on? I said, Since about the 1st of the year, I think. I only found out in July. Tuesday the 11th, I sat in Ambrose Teal's office for 5 hours. I am not going to walk you through all of it. I will tell you that for one stretch of it, a video camera ran on a tripod because Teal started it when the witnesses came in and shut it off when they went out, and that there were 2 witnesses in the room, a retired librarian named Ida Wren and Delbert Fry, neither of whom is named anywhere in anything I own or ever will be, which is the entire point of a witness. Teal asked me the questions out loud, on camera, one at a time, and waited for me to finish every answer. He never once finished a sentence for me. I want to tell you what that felt like after 3 weeks, and I cannot. So I will just say that a man of 71 is not supposed to notice a thing like that. And I noticed it in the first 90 seconds. We were done at 6:40. By then I had signed a will, a durable power of attorney, and with nothing in it yet. which Teal said was the entire point of a trust. I signed all of it at that table, with a notary sitting across from me watching my hand, and Teal put it in a brown envelope, and I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my coat, next to the notebook, and I buttoned the coat. On my way out, I gave Teal one name and one telephone number on the back of a feed receipt, and I told him not to use it unless he had to. He wrote it in his file, and he did not ask me a single question about it. Wednesday the 12th, I drove to the post office in Grundy Center and mailed one letter, certified, restricted delivery, which means one particular human being has to sign for it, and no one else can. Then I drove home and sat on my own porch and drank a cup of coffee and watched the road. That is the whole of it. That is everything I did. I want you to notice that I did not take anything from anybody. I did not accuse anybody of anything. I signed my own name on my own paper, and I put one envelope in the mail. And then I sat down. On Friday the 14th at about 10 in the morning, the carrier came out the gravel with a green card on a clipboard, and Wendell was in the yard loading seed tender pumps, and he walked over and signed it. I watched him from the shop door. He did not read it. He signed the green card, handed the clipboard back, said something to the carrier that made them both laugh, and put the envelope on the dash of his pickup. And I know for a fact it was still on that dash on the 20th because I saw it there. He thought it was from the Farm Service Agency. They send a lot of certified mail. He has been signing for it for 11 years without reading a line of it. I went back in the shop and put a wrench in a drawer I did not need to open. There is a stretch of time in a thing like this that nobody ever talks about, and it is the best part and the worst part at the same time. It is the part after you have done it and before they know. 6 days. In those 6 days, my son prepaid $61,800 for next spring's seed because there was an early order discount that ended on the 20th, and he wanted the discount. In those 6 days, he signed a fertilizer contract for the 2027 season on ground he was not going to have. On the 17th, he went to a farm sale over by Rhinebeck and bought a used combine for $138,000 on a note. And I was told by 3 separate people that he stood in the lot afterward and explained to anyone who slowed down that he was picking up another 80 acres next year and needed the capacity. And on the 18th of August, Charlene called me twice to ask, in a voice like a nurse's, whether I had thought any more about the January renewal. Both times I said, "Let me look at it. I have thought a great deal about those 6 days, and about whether a decent man lets them run. Here is where I have landed. I did not put $1 into that seed order. I did not tell him about the 80 acres. Every single thing he did in that window, he did because he believed a thing he had never once bothered to check, and he had 11 years to check it, and it was 1 page long, and it had his signature on the outside of the envelope. I sat on my porch and I let him buy a combine. I am not proud of the way that felt. I am only telling you it did not feel like nothing. On Sunday the 16th, they held a family meeting in my house. Nobody asked me if there could be a family meeting in my house. Cars came up the gravel at 2 in the afternoon, and by 10, after there were 9 people around a table that seats 8, and Wendell had brought folding chairs of his own from his own garage, which is a small thing that I have never been able to stop thinking about. Tobin was there. He is 9. He is Wendell's youngest, and he sat on the arm of the couch behind the adults with his shoes not touching the floor. Verity was not there. Nobody had called her. I found that out 3 days later, and I did not say one word about it to anybody. Brody was there. He sat on the far end and looked at the tablecloth all afternoon, and he did not take one of his brother's folding chairs. Charlene ran it. She had a legal pad. She said they had spoken with a place in Grundy Center, and there was a unit available the first week of September, and it was, she said, a lovely community, and that I would be more comfortable in town, and that the driveway alone in January was a hazard at my age. I said I have plowed that driveway since 1978. She said, "That's sort of the point, Dad. Then she reached over to the counter where I keep my keys and my gloves and my book, and she picked up the book, and she held it up over the table with 2 fingers, open to the middle, and she read out loud in a voice for the room. June 9th, 1991. .40. Wind north, 12. She let it hang there. He's writing down rain from 1991, she said. Who does that? Then she took her phone out and photographed 4 pages of it, one after another, on my table, in front of my grandson. I did not say anything about the 52 years. I did not say anything about the hail adjuster in 1993 or the crop insurance appeal in 2012, or the fact that every drainage decision made on that farm since Nixon is in there in my hand. There is no argument you can make in a room like that. You cannot argue somebody out of a decision they made 3 months before they walked in. I reached across and I took my book back and I put it in my coat pocket and I said, "Let me look at that place." Charlene said, "So you'll come and see it?" I said, "Let me look at it." Tobin got down off the arm of the couch during the part about the driveway and came and stood beside my chair and leaned on it, the way a kid does when he has decided which side of a room he is on without being able to tell you why. He did not say a word the whole afternoon. I put my hand on his back one time and left it there, and then took it away. I am going to say this once, plainly, because it matters more to me than any of the rest of it. Not one time in the next 4 days did I use that boy. It was available to me. It was available more than once. He is 9 years old. He was in my house, and he had eyes. I did not. On Thursday the 13th, I had made a second telephone call, and on Wednesday the 19th, a man named Sig Rausch drove out from Des Moines with a file box in the back seat. He was in his 50s, and he had the flat, unhurried manner of a man who has heard everything twice. He worked for the Special Investigations Unit at Cedar Mutual Life. He sat at my table, and he opened the box, and he took 3 things out of it. The first was an application for a $500,000 life insurance policy on the life of Calvin Anderson, dated the 15th of July, 2024. Owner, Wendell Anderson. Beneficiary, Wendell Anderson. The signature on the bottom was my name. It was not my hand. I have signed my name maybe 400,000 times, and the C has a hitch in it from a wrist I broke in 1976, and there was no hitch in that C. The second thing was the last page of that same application. The block at the bottom where a notary signs, and the stamp pressed into it belonged to Laura Lee Prentice of Black Hawk County, and it swore that on the 15th of July, 2024, I had appeared in front of her. The third thing Rausch did not put on the table. He put a small speaker down and he said, "Mr. Anderson, part of the underwriting on a policy this size is a recorded telephone interview. I need you to listen to this and tell me if that's you." Then he pressed a button, and I sat in my own kitchen and listened to a man say, "This is Calvin Anderson, yes, born in 1955, 17 questions. Heart, blood pressure, tobacco, hospitalizations in the last 5 years. A man I have never met answering for me, in a voice pitched low and slow the way a young man imagines an old one sounds." I asked Rausch to play it again. He did. Halfway through the second time, I put my hand up and he stopped it. I want to describe what that was like, and I find I can only get at it sideways. When you are 71, people have already begun to speak for you a little. They finish your sentences at the counter. They tell the waitress what you want. You let it go because they mean well, and because fighting it makes you into exactly the old man they think you are. And then one day a stranger plays you a recording of somebody being you for money. Rausch put the papers back in order and squared them up. "There's a few more things," he said. "And I'll tell you because you'll find them anyway. Somebody sat for the paramedical exam in your place. Blood, urine, blood pressure. A man with a clipboard in somebody's kitchen in August of 2024, using your name and your date of birth. That is its own charge, and it is not a small one. The policy issued on the 12th of September." He squared the pages again. "A file this size gets one more look at the 2-year mark," he said. "That's the 12th of September. After that it closes and it sits there taking premiums, and the only 2 things that open it again are a death or a complaint. I would rather have a complaint." I did the arithmetic before he finished the sentence. 2 years from the 12th of September, 2024. 3.5 weeks, I said. 3.5 weeks, he said. Then I told him the part he did not have, and it took me a while to get it out. Since January of 2025, I had missed 14 cardiology appointments in Waterloo. I had not missed them. I had shown up for 2 of them and been told at the desk that they had been canceled that morning, and I had assumed it was the clinic. And both times I drove home and did not make a fuss because I am not a man who makes a fuss at a desk. Rausch asked me who had the number on file as an alternate contact. Charlene. He wrote that down, and he did not say anything else about it, and I have decided that I will not say anything else about it either, because there is a line in this that I am not going to walk up to, and neither should you. I do not believe my son wanted me dead. I have thought about it in the middle of the night more times than I want to admit, and I do not believe it. But I know this. They needed me to last until the 12th of September, and in 19 months, not one of them ever asked me how the appointments had gone. That is not murder. That is something else, and it does not have a name, and it kept me awake worse than the other thing would have. At about 8 o'clock that same evening, headlights came up my gravel too fast. Wendell had the envelope in his hand. It was open. Somebody at the seed dealership had asked him a question about the 2027 ground, and he had gone out to his pickup and taken the thing off the dash and read it standing in a parking lot in Grundy Center. Written notice of termination of farm tenancy. Delivered by certified mail, restricted delivery, signed for by Wendell Anderson on August the 14th. Tenancy terminates March the 1st, 2027. He came in the door with it and he did not shout. I will give him that. He sat down at the Formica table across from me, and he put it flat, and he smoothed it with his hand twice, and he said, "You did this on the 12th. I said I had. He said, "I signed for it." I said, "You did." And then he did the thing I had been waiting 3 weeks for and dreading, which was that he stopped being 46. He said, "Dad, I'm your son. I've farmed this ground 11 years. You do this to your own son over a room in town? I want you to hear my answer exactly, because it is the only speech I made in the entire month of August, and it was 4 sentences long. I said, I gave notice under the law. The law says the 1st of September, and I mailed it on the 12th. And the ground is yours until the 1st of March, so you can take your crop off. I am not throwing you off anything. I am done giving you something I never once said out loud that I was giving you. And neither did you." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "You had 11 years to open an envelope." He sat there. The kitchen clock went. Then he said quietly, and this is the truest thing he said all summer, "You never told me it was a gift." And he was right. That is mine. I gave him $175 an acre every year for 11 years. And I never once said the words out loud, because saying it would have embarrassed both of us. And so he grew up inside a thing he thought was ordinary, and I let him. A man who gives in silence should not be surprised when nobody thanks him. He should be surprised when they act like it is theirs. And I was not even surprised at that. I told him that. I said, "That part is mine and I'll carry it." Then I told him the other part. I said, "Wendell, there is a $500,000 policy on my life with your name on it, and I have heard the tape." He did not say a word. He looked at the table for a long time, and then he got up and walked out and did not close the door behind him. And I sat there and listened to his truck go down the gravel and turn wrong at the end of it, north instead of south, which is the long way to his own house. I went out to the tenant house at 10 that night. Brody was on the step with the light off. He had known since supper. He said, "I signed something, didn't I?" I said he had. He said, "I didn't read it." I said, I know. He asked me where he was supposed to go, and he asked it like a boy, and he is 34. Teal had put a 30-day notice in the mail to the tenant house on the 12th, the same trip to the post office as the other envelope. 2 envelopes, 1 stop, and I had stood there and watched a clerk stamp both of them. I told Brody that, and I told him the date it ran out because a man is owed the date. Here is what I did, and I did it because of something Doreen said to me once about him when he was about 11, which is that Brody has never in his life been given a thing he was expected to keep. I had already called a landlord in Cedar Falls that afternoon. I paid the deposit and the first month, $1,560, direct to the man, not to my son. I did not hand Brody $1, and I never will. I told him that on the step. I said, I paid for the door. I'm not paying for the house. He put his head down, and I let him have it, and I did not touch him, because he would not have wanted that. And after a while he said, Are you going to talk to me again? I said, I'm talking to you now. That is the whole of the mercy I had in me, and I have not regretted the size of it. The next morning, before court, Ambrose Teal said one thing to me in the hallway that I turned down. He said that given the disinterment application and the forged consent, he could go in and ask for an order restraining Wendell from the cemetery parcel, and that if he did, Wendell would fold on the conservatorship petition inside of a day, because no man wants that readout in Grundy County. He was right. It would have worked. It was the cheapest, fastest, cleanest win available to me that whole month. I said no. He asked me why, and he had a right to ask, because I was paying him. I said, His mother is lying out there. I'm not going to pick her up and use her as a pry bar. Not even on him. Especially not on him. Teal looked at me, and then he wrote something on his pad and turned the page. We went in at 9. The hearing on the temporary conservatorship was in Grundy Center, in a courtroom with 11 rows of benches and about 9 people in them. Judge Halverson, Thursday, the 20th of August. Their lawyer went first because it was their application. He was polite about it, which is how these things are done. He put in Dr. Vandekamp's letter. He put in Brody's statement. He said the family had observed a decline over a period of years, a gradual withdrawal, an increasing rigidity about routine, and then he handed up the exhibit that Charlene had prepared, which was 4 photographs of 4 pages of my notebook. He described them as an example of compulsive record-keeping consistent with cognitive change in an elderly male. Judge Halverson turned the photographs around and looked at them for a while. Then he said, Counsel, is the original available? Teal stood up and said it was in my coat pocket and could he approach. He carried it up there and the judge turned pages for what felt like a very long time, and the room got quiet the way a room does when nobody planned for the silence. He stopped once and asked me directly from the bench, not through anybody. Mr. Anderson? What's a dash? I stood up. I said, It means I was there and I couldn't take a reading. He said, There's one on July 29th of this year. I said, Yes, sir. I was in the cardiac unit at Waterloo. That's my initials, left-handed. There was a needle in the other one. He looked at the page a while longer. Then he said, 52 years. I said, Since 1974, sir, there's 11 dashes in it. He handed it back down to Teal, and Teal brought it to me, and I put it in my coat and buttoned the coat. Then Teal did the thing I had hired him for. He put in Dr. Halstead's evaluation, all of it, the raw scores, 10 days old, no family member present at any point. He put in the video of the 11th, an hour and 40 minutes of me answering questions with 2 witnesses who get nothing. He put in the letter from the county about an application to disinter and relocate human remains, filed the 21st of April, with a consent of next of kin signed by a son whose father was alive, and in a doctor's office in Waterloo that same morning. And then he did not say anything clever at all. He simply laid 2 pieces of paper on the rail in front of the bench, side by side, and left them there. On the left, the application their side had brought that morning, a sworn statement that Calvin Anderson had been in decline for a period of years and could not manage his own financial affairs. On the right, a life insurance application dated the 15th of July, 2024, on which somebody had sworn that Calvin Anderson was of sound mind, had answered 17 underwriting questions himself by telephone in his own voice. Teal said, "Your Honor, both of these cannot be true. Whichever one the court accepts, the other one is a crime." Wendell was in the first row on their side. He had not looked at me once since 9 o'clock, and when Teal set the second piece of paper down, he put his hand over his mouth and left it there. Then, he used the telephone number off the back of that feed receipt, which he had called on Friday and not told me about, and he called Laura Lee Prentice, who had driven 40 minutes and was sitting in the second row with a certified copy of her journal on her lap, because on Monday she had surrendered her commission and turned the original in to the Secretary of State without one living soul asking her to, and had paid for the copy out of her own pocket. She was sworn. She opened the copy. She read out what she was doing on the afternoon of July the 15th, 2024 in Cedar Falls, and who was with her, and she said, "I was not with Mr. Anderson. I have never notarized anything for Mr. Anderson in my life." Her daughter was 11 feet away. Judge Halverson denied the application for a temporary conservator from the bench. He set the full petition for hearing, and he said something else, without raising his voice, that I would read at my funeral. He said, "Mr. Anderson has been in this room for 2 hours, and I have not yet heard anyone ask him a question." Then he directed the clerk to send a copy of the file to the Iowa Insurance Division and to the county attorney. They withdrew the petition 8 days later. It never went to a jury. I should have felt like a man who won something. I want to tell you about that evening instead. Teal had me sign a release for my own records at the cardiology clinic in Waterloo to document the 14 canceled appointments, and the clinic sent everything, because that is what they do. Along with the appointment log came 3 years of billing. I read it at my kitchen table at about 9 that night with the window open. There were 38 lines on it where the patient portion had been paid at the time of service. Card ending in the same 4 digits every time. $11,680 over 3 years. It was not my card. I sat there and I did the thing an old man does, which is added up twice because he does not trust it the first time. Verity drives a 2004 pickup with a bench seat and a hole rusted through the passenger floor pan that she covers with a rubber mat. Every summer for 3 years I have said, "Girl, let me help you get something with a heater in it." And every summer she has said, "Dad, it runs." She has been paying for my heart since 2023 and driving that truck so she could. I called her at 9:30 and she answered on the second ring the way she always does, and I could not get the first sentence out, and she waited. She did not say, "Dad, are you there?" She waited. Finally I said, 38, and after a second she said, "Oh, just that. Oh, like a woman caught leaving flowers." Then she said the other thing, the thing I did not know was in the world, and she said it fast, the way you say a thing you have carried too long. She said, "Mom asked me to, in the hospital." She said, "Let the ground go to the boys, they'll need it." She said, "You just don't let your father sit by himself." 5 years? 5 years my daughter has been keeping a promise to her mother while both her brothers called her the one who married down. And she never once told me, because telling me would have made it a favor. And she did not want it to be a favor. I have not cried in front of another human being since March of 2021, and I did not that night either. But I had to put the phone down on the table for a minute, and when I picked it back up, she was still there, not saying anything, waiting for me to finish. She learned that from somebody. I would like to think it was me, but I know for a fact it was her mother. Friday the 21st, I drove to Rhinebeck with a folder. Teal had drawn it that week, a warranty deed of the whole 240 acres and the house and the shop to Verity Strand, with a life estate reserved to me. She would own the remainder the day I handed it across the table. I would have the ground under my feet until I am under it. Signed. Notarized. Every line. I put it on her kitchen table and I sat down across from her and I said, "It's done. It's yours." And my daughter looked at it for about 4 seconds. And then she pushed it back across the table at me with 2 fingers. She said, "Ask me first." I said, "What?" She said, "You spent all summer fighting so somebody would ask you what you wanted and you just drove out here and told me what I'm getting. Ask me first." I sat in that chair in her kitchen with the folder between us, and I could not get my breath right. 40 years. 40 years I never asked that girl one time what she wanted, because she was the easy one, because she never complained, because I had decided somewhere around 1996 that Verity was fine, and I had never revisited it. I had spent 2 weeks and $11,000 of lawyer's time and 1 open-heart summer fighting for the right to be asked, and I had done the exact same thing to my own daughter every day for 4 decades and never once noticed. So I closed the folder. I put my hands flat on her table and I said, "All right, what do you want?" And then I did the harder half, which is that I shut my mouth and I let her get all the way to the end of it, twice, including the part where she stopped in the middle for a while, and I did not fill it in for her. She wanted 3 things. She wanted the Northwest 3 acres put in a deed of their own, with a restriction on it that it can never be sold, farmed, or moved by her or by anybody after her. She wanted Wendell's 3 children named in the trust, all of them, Tobin included, in equal shares. And she wanted it written so that no parent of theirs could touch a dollar of it. And she wanted me to keep the house until I die and quit talking about the room in town, because she said, "You plow that driveway better than any of us." Then she said, "Now ask me about the rest of it, and I'll tell you when I've decided." 7 months later, it is the middle of March 2027, and the tenancy has been over since the 1st. They held the machinery sale on the 8th, on the yard where my son learned to drive a tractor at 11 years old. The combine he bought for $138,000 in August brought 94. The seed prepay he could not get back went to a co-op that had no ground to deliver it to, and settled at 40 cents on the dollar. Truman Coyle rents the 240 now at $285 an acre, which is what it was always worth, and he has hired Wendell for the spring, and my son will work that ground for wages, and I did not arrange that, and I did not prevent it. The insurance case is with the county attorney. Cedar Mutual voided the policy outright. A signature that is not yours does not make a contract, and a contract that never existed does not get a 2-year clock on it, and their lawyer had to explain that to me twice before I would believe it was that simple. The Iowa Insurance Division revoked Charlene's producer license in November. She had built her whole life on knowing which paper to put in front of which person at which moment, and now her signature is not worth anything to anybody, anywhere. And she had to sit in a small room in Des Moines with 3 people and listen to that recording all the way through. Brody has an apartment in Cedar Falls and a job at the co-op scale house, weighing trucks. In December, an envelope came with a money order in it for $260 and nothing written on the paper. Another one came in February. I have not cashed either of them, and I am not going to. And I have not told him that. The county closed the disinterment file in September. The drainage district went around the corner, which is what they should have done in April and would have done if anybody had made one telephone call to the man who owns it. Laura Lee Prentice comes out most Sundays. She is 68 years old, and she is the only person in this story who lost something without being made to, and she does not talk about her daughter, and I do not ask. She brought cedar seedlings in October, and we put 9 of them in at the end of the west line where the 1983 planting has gaps in it now, because the old ones are 43 years on, and cedars do not go forever either. Verity still drives the truck with the mat over the floor pan, She says she is thinking about it. I ask her about once a month, and then I wait. And Tobin came out on Saturday. His father brought him and stayed in the truck, and that is where we are, and it may be where we stay. The boy walked out to the fence post with me where the gauge is. It had rained in the night, the first real one of the year. I did not tell him to read it. I have been practicing. I said, do you want to? He said yes, and he got up on the bottom wire and squinted at the glass and told me the number, and I gave him the pen, and he wrote it in the book himself. March the 6th, 2027. 0.85. Wind out of the southeast. It is not my handwriting on that line. It is the first line in 53 years that is not. I have thought about what I would say to my father if I could get 5 minutes with him in that rented house in Grundy Center. I used to think I would tell him I got the land back, that I bought it a piece at a time and put a fence around it, and it is still standing. That is not what I would say now. I would say, somebody asked me, Dad, it took until I was 71 years old, and it cost me 2 of my 3 children to get there, and I do not know yet if it is a fair trade, and I do not think I ever will. But somebody asked me, and I sat down, and I got to answer all the way to the end. That is the whole story. Thank you for staying with me through it. I want to leave you with one thing, and then I will let you go. I have thought all year about where it actually started, and it was not the hospital. It was not the stakes in the ground. I think it started the first time somebody finished a sentence for me in a store, and I let it go, because I'd not want to be difficult. You let that go 100 times, and it stops being a courtesy and becomes an arrangement. And one day, you are in a bed, listening to people plan your address. So here is what I would ask you, and I mean it honestly, not as a way to end a story. If your mother or your father is still living, when was the last time you asked them a question and then waited all the way through the answer without helping? Not what do you want for your birthday? A real one. What do you want to do next? And if you are my age, and you are reading a piece of paper somebody has slid in front of you, you are allowed to say 5 words and nothing else. Let me look at it. It is a complete sentence. Nobody can make it into anything else. Tell me in the comments. Tell me about your father, or about the paper somebody put in front of you, or about the one call you made from a bed somewhere. I read them. I am 71, and I have the time. Take care of yourselves. Ask somebody something this week, and then be quiet long enough to hear the end of it.